All right, everybody, we are going to prep for one of my favorite dishes of all time, which is quiche. This is a family recipe that my mom made for us growing up, and I continue to make it constantly because it is so delicious. And it is we use it as a dinner quiche most of the time. I know it's often thought that quiche is more of a breakfast meal, but the way we make this, which is technically a quiche Lorraine, we eat it at night for dinner. And so we want to prep our broccoli, fill a cereal bowl all the way to the top, and then cube our ham and do the same exact thing. So ham and broccoli, both, just grab any cereal bowl you have, nothing too big, just a normal size cereal bowl, and fill them up. This is going to be really the core ingredients for the quiche, along with the cheese, which we'll grate next. Now, I have found that buying the pre-sliced ham that you can just immediately cube up is the best. You can buy pre-cubed ham. I've just found that it's generally too large for what I like to have in the quiche. I don't really like having too small or too big of pieces in there, just kind of the right size. And it works well. So you'll save a ton of time by buying the pre-sliced ham and just chopping it up yourself. If you want to go for the pre-cubed stuff, just look for something that isn't quite as big as what I generally see in the stores. And so we are almost finished here. You can see a full cereal bowl, and we're going to move on to the cheese. So the cheese we use for this recipe is Swiss cheese, which actually isn't my favorite cheese. I don't really eat Swiss cheese outside of this dish at all. And I don't use it on sandwiches. I don't eat it plain. But in this recipe, it is phenomenal. So just trust me on this. Go with 1 pound. That's what we use in this recipe, and grate it up into a bowl and put it off to the side. I'll generally put some saran wrap over each of these bowls and just put these off to the side in the fridge so they stay fresh while we prep the dough and get everything else ready for assembling the quiche later on. So we have some ice for ice water, pie dish, some all-purpose flour, Crisco. We're gonna go in with 2 cups of flour for our dough, 2/3 cups flour of Crisco, and this is just regular Crisco. I know a lot of people use butter to make their doughs. I've always used Crisco. I love the flavor it brings, and it's much easier, I have found, to work with. But you can use whichever dough you prefer. Store-bought, you can use butter, it doesn't matter. I just tend to use this recipe. So you can see I've incorporated all of the Crisco. We don't want any large bits in there. And now we're gonna go in with our ice water. So I will put some water aside before this and put ice in it, and then fill 2/3 cup, which is the recipe, and slowly add this in while we are doing our dough mixing. Just kind of slowly add it in bit by bit. And right when it comes together, I will stop. I don't want to overwork this. I just want to make sure that all of the dry ingredients are no longer dry, and this dough should have a wet feel to it. It's going to be wet, but not sticky. It shouldn't be too sticky. But you want it to be a little wet because it's going to help with the process of rolling it out, which we're going to do next here. And if you need to add a little bit of ice water, just dip your fingers in some ice water and kind of coat the surroundings of the dough. This is really just going to help us roll it out without having any cracks or any issues with the dough once it goes onto the pie pan. So next step here, we're going to dust a surface so that we can roll out our dough with some all-purpose flour. I'm going to dust a little bit on top, and then I'll lightly dust the dough roller as well. So we're going to start rolling it slowly side to side. Make sure we get a nice, somewhat round shape that we will eventually coat our pie dish with. And any pie dish will be fine. I use a normal sized, I believe it's a 9-inch pie dish, but whatever you have should be fine as long as it's round. So you want to get this to about just under 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch or so thick. Roll it up, gently place it over your pie dish. And then I'm going to take the sides and lift them up so that I can push down on the inside and make sure it's evenly distributed across the whole inside of the pie pan. We don't want any bubbles. We don't want anything in there that's going to cause issues later when we do our pre-bake. So we're almost done here. This recipe does require a pre-bake. I highly recommend not skipping that step, or you can end up with dough that isn't cooked all of the way, and that will make for a pretty rough experience as you go to eat your final product. So trust me on this, don't skip this step, and everything will be hunky-dory. So now I'm gonna just take a butter knife and cut around the edges and make sure that the overhang is about 1 inch hanging down from the side all the way around. And the reason for this is in the next step, you're going to see I'm going to take the overhanging pieces of dough and fold them underneath where the rim of the pan is to give us some thickness around that rim, which is going to be a key part of our crust, which is going to keep a lot of the ingredients in the quiche as it bakes. So once we get this finished nice and even, you're not going to see it very well just because of the way I filmed it. I didn't realize until after that my arm was in the way the majority of the time, but we're really just going to take the dough, flip it under itself, fold it under itself and go all the way around and overlap until it's finished. So there's no more overhanging pieces. And it doesn't have to look perfect because we're going to now take our fingers and use the 2-pinch method and go all the way around, and we're going to clean this up and make it look a little bit nicer. But the point of that first part is to have enough of the dough folded under itself around the rim that we can use this method, pinch it, and it's going to give us some height to our crust, which is going to help keep all of our ingredients in as it bakes, which is just so important when you're doing this. So then I'm just using my hands to push on the inside and make sure everything's even. There's no bubbles. If there are bubbles, make sure to take care of them. And there we go. So this is fully ready for the next step, which I tend to just use foil for this. I will cut a circle that fits the bottom of the dough, and it's going to fit in there perfectly so that we can use our pie balls for this pre-bake. And the pre-bake is essential, as we mentioned, to this meal, and it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes at about 350 degrees. So we'll take the foil, gently put it at the bottom of our crust. Make sure there's no gaps or anything on the rims where the pie balls can escape. And then we're just going to take our pie balls and put them in on top of that to give us some nice weight. And this is because if you don't do that, when it goes in at 350 for about 10 to 15 minutes, you'll get bubbles and the bottom of the crust can rise up or the sides can start to rise up, and it'll really mess up what you're trying to accomplish. So don't skip out on that. Now here we have our milk, half and half, nutmeg, and red chili powder, our 3 jumbo eggs, and those are going to be our ingredients for the wet ingredients that we're going to pour into the quiche. But I've taken this out after 15 minutes. It's brown. You can't really see it here. It looks more whitish, but there is some slight brown to it, and it's harder now, but you're not fully baking it, and that's the point. You don't want to fully bake it here. You just want to get it to where it has a bit of a head start before you go in for the full bake. And now we're going to start to put together our wet ingredients, 3 jumbo eggs. We're going to do a half a cup of half and half, a half a cup of milk, we're going to do a half teaspoon of nutmeg and 1.5 teaspoons of red chili powder. And that is it. Pretty simple ingredients, but delicious as an end result. And we're just going to whisk this in our stand mixer for about 45 seconds to 1 minute. Make sure everything's incorporated, but not overly beaten. All right, we're all done here and ready for the next step. We're gonna assemble our quiche. And to start, we're just gonna put a small layer of cheese at the bottom of the crust. You don't wanna put too much, but just a very light sprinkling at the bottom to give us a nice cheesy base layer. And the next step is we're gonna do half of the entire portion of ham. So go all in with half of the bowl right away. And then we're just gonna evenly distribute this on top of that base layer of cheese. Next step is we're gonna do half of the entire bowl of broccoli and do the same exact thing. Make sure there aren't any large stems. If you see some, go ahead and just pull them out. During the prep process earlier, you saw me getting rid of most of the stems of this broccoli. You don't want large stem chunks in there. Next is we're gonna do half of the cheese. So after that little base layer, what's remaining, take half of that and distribute it on top of the broccoli. You'll notice we're already starting to fill this thing up and we're getting close to being overflowing with ingredients, but trust me, keep going. We're gonna stack this as high as we can and everything will get put into this quiche. Next, we'll just finish out the rest of the ham that we have. So the second half of the bowl, and continue with our method of just spreading it out across and making it nice and even. Probably being a little too meticulous here, but you just don't want any large pockets of anything in one area. It makes for a different experience when you go to eat it. So the more even you can get, the better. And then we're gonna go in with the rest of our broccoli. The second half of that bowl of broccoli, we're just gonna finish this out and coat the top of the quiche. Now, the next step is vital to not mess up. And I have messed it up. So if you do, don't feel bad, but you would think intuitively that the cheese goes next, the rest of the cheese, but actually we wanna pour in our wet ingredients first. And so you'll see me here just taking directly from the stand mixing bowl, and we're going to pour it in as evenly as possible, and making sure to get to the center and to the sides. You don't have to go so fast. You can just slowly kind of make sure that this gets put in. You don't want to do this the opposite way, because if you do, it'll really mess up the cheese. So wet ingredients, and then last step is the rest of the Swiss cheese. We're going to cover this quiche entirely, spread everything out, and get it ready for baking. Now in this recipe, we bake this quiche at 375 for 1 hour. So make sure your oven is still preheated. You did the pre-bake at 350 for 10 to 15 minutes, and then you're gonna do 1 hour at 375, and your quiche will be done after that. So we're almost at the point where we're overflowing. We have a little bit of cheese hanging on the crust. That's okay. You just want to make sure it's you try to get everything kind of tightly packed, not tightly packed in, but just make sure it's not hanging over the sides too much. Going into the oven at 375, and 1 hour later, your quiche will be done and the house will smell absolutely amazing. This is such a delicious meal. I set it aside 10 minutes, let it rest, and then start to cut into it to serve for dinner. It'll be the perfect temperature. Now, one thing to note is, and don't get freaked out by this, but the first piece of quiche that you cut into is always the worst. And it's without fail, it happens to me every time. The first slice of quiche is always the ugly slice. And that's okay. My wife actually likes this piece and she requests it. So I think that's hilarious, but it'll come out and you'll see some liquid at the bottom. You can use either a paper towel or a baster to suck out some of the liquid, and that's natural as well, so don't freak out about that. The second piece, things start to look really nice and come out just perfect. And so we have one slice of our quiche ready to eat, and it'll be the perfect temperature, not too hot, but still, you know, you'll see some steam coming off of it. It's just perfect to start diving into. Now, I've seen people use hot sauce on this. You can really doll it up however you want. I eat it plain. I don't need anything with it. It's perfect to me the way it is. So just however you like to eat it, it is up to you, but I don't think it needs anything at all. This is just so perfect, and I hope you try it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much.